The truth about the ex of the person you truly love was exposed last night. Here's the big secret they were hiding. Something shifted in the silence last night, not with a loud confession, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a single unexpected conversation that was never meant to be overheard. One sentence escaped. One glance lingered too long. And before the night was over, the carefully protected story surrounding the ex of the person you truly love had begun to unravel. Nobody planned for the truth to surface this way. Yet once the first piece appeared, every missing puzzle suddenly seemed to have a place. The strange part? The biggest secret wasn't what everyone expected. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about something that had quietly shaped every decision made afterward. Stay with this, because the smallest detail from that evening may completely change the way you understand everything that came before. The evening looked ordinary from the outside. Soft lights reflected across windows. Conversations drifted through the room as people laughed without realizing history was quietly rewriting itself nearby. Your person sat listening more than speaking, noticing tiny changes others ignored. Their former partner appeared unusually calm, almost rehearsed, as though carrying a burden that had become too heavy to hide forever. Then someone asked a simple question. One that seemed harmless enough to disappear into the background. But instead of receiving an easy answer, the room fell strangely quiet. Eyes shifted. Smiles faded. Even those who didn't know the full story sensed that something important had just stepped into the open. No one interrupted. No one rushed to explain. The silence itself became the loudest voice in the room. And within that silence, a truth began revealing itself piece by piece. Before long, your person realized that the version of the past they had accepted for so long might never have been the complete picture. But that's only where the mystery truly begins, because another unexpected discovery was already waiting just around the corner. As the night moved forward, conversations separated into smaller circles, each carrying fragments of information that somehow connected without anyone realizing it. One friend remembered an old promise. Another recalled a conversation that never quite made sense until now. A forgotten message. A delayed explanation. A decision that suddenly looked completely different under this new light. Slowly, the image of the ex transformed, not into a villain, not into a hero, but into someone who had been protecting a secret for reasons nobody had imagined. Your person stood there absorbing every new detail, realizing that many of the unanswered questions they had carried for months were finally finding their missing answers. Yet one mystery remained untouched. Why wait until last night for the truth to emerge? What changed so suddenly that hiding it was no longer possible? That answer hadn't surfaced, not yet. And when it finally does, you'll understand why this wasn't simply an exposed secret. It was the beginning of an entirely different story that almost no one saw coming. A single unexpected message arrived just before sunrise, and the moment your person read it, every assumption they had been holding on to became impossible to ignore. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It wasn't even very long. But hidden between ordinary words was a detail so specific that it connected everything revealed the night before. Suddenly, scattered memories no longer felt random. They fit together like pieces that had always belonged to the same picture. If you're still here, you're exactly where you need to be, because the next discovery doesn't just explain the secret, it explains why it stayed hidden for so long. Your person couldn't stop replaying every conversation they had ever shared with their ex. Little moments that once seemed meaningless now carried entirely different meanings. A cancelled plan. An awkward smile. A sudden change of subject whenever your name came up. None of it looked accidental anymore. Then someone who had quietly witnessed much of the past finally decided to speak. They weren't interested in creating drama. They simply wanted the truth to stop living in the shadows. According to them, the biggest secret wasn't that the ex wanted to hold on to the past, it was that they had spent a long time convincing themselves they could control how everyone else saw it. They avoided certain conversations, left out important details, and allowed misunderstandings to continue because admitting the full story would have meant facing uncomfortable realities. Your person listened carefully, not with anger, but with growing clarity. Every sentence removed another layer of confusion until one realization became impossible to ignore: the past had never been as simple as it appeared. As the morning light filled the room, your person made a quiet decision. They weren't going to let old misunderstandings shape their future anymore. Instead of chasing unanswered questions, they wanted honest answers, wherever they might lead. That choice brought an unexpected sense of peace. Sometimes the strongest turning points don't happen with dramatic speeches. They happen when someone finally chooses clarity over confusion. And if this story has drawn you in so far, thank you for spending these moments here. If it resonates with you, sharing your thoughts in the comments or passing it along to someone who enjoys meaningful stories helps keep conversations like this alive. But don't leave just yet, because one final piece still hasn't been revealed. There's someone connected to this story who hasn't spoken at all, and when they finally break their silence, everything your person believed about the ex, and about the future, will take one more surprising turn. No one expected the quietest person in the room to become the one who changed everything, yet that's exactly what happened. Hours after everyone believed the conversation was over, someone who had remained completely silent asked to meet your person privately. There was no audience. No pressure. Just two chairs, a calm afternoon, and a truth that had been waiting far longer than anyone realized. Before a single word was spoken, your person could already sense this conversation would answer the question that had been lingering since the secret first surfaced. But the answer wasn't about the past alone, it was about the future that had almost been changed forever. The quiet witness looked your person in the eye and said something unforgettable. The story you heard last night was real, but it wasn't complete. Those words settled into the silence like the final piece of a complicated puzzle. They explained that the ex had spent months protecting an image that no longer reflected reality. It wasn't done out of cruelty. It wasn't even done to win anyone back. It happened because admitting the full truth would have meant admitting they had been holding on to a version of the past that no longer existed. They had quietly realized that your person's heart had already begun moving toward a different chapter, but they struggled to let go of what once felt familiar. That realization made every confusing conversation, every delayed response, and every mixed signal suddenly make perfect sense. The mystery wasn't why the ex acted the way they did, it was why they couldn't bring themselves to say goodbye to a story that had already reached its ending. There's another layer here that most people would completely miss. so stay with this because the next revelation changes the emotional weight of everything you've heard. As your person walked away from that meeting, something inside them felt lighter than it had in a very long time. For the first time, they stopped looking backward for explanations and started looking ahead with confidence. They understood that the biggest secret exposed last night wasn't simply about the X. It was about how hidden truths can quietly shape people's choices until someone finally has the courage to face reality. And just when it seemed every question had been answered, one unexpected detail surfaced from an old conversation that nobody had thought about in months. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it pointed toward one final mystery that could completely redefine how your person sees this entire journey. The next moment doesn't just reveal another secret. It reveals who quietly knew the truth from the very beginning. An old voice resurfaced when nobody was looking, not through a dramatic announcement, but through a forgotten memory that someone suddenly remembered at exactly the right moment. Your person paused as the story unfolded, realizing this wasn't another coincidence. It felt as though the final missing thread had quietly waited until everyone was ready to see it. A simple comment from months ago, one that had been dismissed at the time, now carried a completely different meaning. The room wasn't filled with tension anymore. Instead, there was a calm sense that everything hidden was finally stepping into the light, one honest moment at a time. The person who had quietly known the truth all along explained why they had stayed silent. They weren't protecting the X. They weren't choosing sides. They believed that some truths only matter when people are emotionally ready to hear them. If they had spoken too soon, no one would have believed them. But after everything revealed the previous night, the pieces finally made sense together. They shared that the X had been carrying one private fear above all else, not losing control, not being judged, but accepting that the connection they once held no longer belonged to the present. That fear had influenced countless choices, creating misunderstandings that seemed far larger than they really were. Your person listened carefully, and for the first time, there was no confusion left in their expression. Only understanding. The mystery that once felt impossible to solve had become surprisingly human. Before this journey continues, here's something worth remembering. If stories like this keep you thinking long after the video ends, sharing them with someone who enjoys meaningful mysteries, or leaving your own thoughts below, helps these conversations reach others who appreciate them too. But don't disappear yet, because the final chapter is closer than you think, and one unexpected conversation is still waiting. As the sun began to set, your person took one last look at everything they had learned. The exposed secret wasn't about scandal or shocking twists. It was about perspective. About how silence, assumptions, and unfinished conversations can reshape the way people remember an entire relationship. With the truth finally visible, the past no longer felt like a burden. It became a lesson that opened the door to something healthier, calmer, and far more genuine. Yet just as they believed this chapter had reached its peaceful conclusion, a new message appeared, one that wasn't from the X at all. It came from someone whose name had never entered the story before. And the first sentence of that message suggested there was one final truth still hidden, a truth that could change not only what happened last night, but what happens next. The name on the message wasn't familiar, and that was exactly what made your person stop in their tracks. There were no dramatic introductions, no emotional declarations, just a quiet note that began with a single sentence: "I think you deserve to know why none of this happened the way it seemed." It wasn't from the ex. It wasn't from a close friend. It was from someone who had quietly crossed paths with everyone involved without ever becoming part of the story. Sometimes the final piece doesn't come from the people standing at the center of the picture, it comes from someone watching from the edge. And what this person shared would reveal the biggest truth of all. The message explained that for a long time, everyone had been looking in the wrong direction. The focus had always been on what the ex said, what they did, or what they chose not to reveal. But the real turning point had happened much earlier, in a moment so ordinary that nobody recognized its importance. The writer described seeing your person choose kindness when it would have been easier to hold on to frustration. They remembered quiet patience instead of arguments, respectful distance instead of unnecessary conflict, and sincere hope instead of resentment. Those choices changed how others viewed the entire situation, even if no one admitted it at the time. According to the message, the ex eventually realized that no hidden story, no unfinished explanation, and no carefully protected image could compete with genuine character. That realization didn't happen overnight. It grew slowly until the truth became impossible to avoid. Suddenly, every hidden secret from the previous night pointed toward one simple conclusion: authenticity had quietly outlasted every misunderstanding. Stay with this final stretch, because there's still one remarkable detail left that ties every chapter together. Your person read the message one last time before placing the phone down with a peaceful smile. They no longer needed every unanswered question to have a perfect explanation. They no longer needed the past to change for the future to feel hopeful. The greatest secret exposed last night wasn't really about the ex at all. It was about how truth has a way of finding the light, even after spending a long time in the shadows. And just when it seemed this journey had reached its natural ending, another unexpected notification appeared. It contained only 6 words: "There's one thing nobody has told you." Your person's heart skipped for a moment, not out of fear, but out of curiosity. Because if everything revealed so far had only prepared them for this final discovery, then the last conversation might become the one they remember for the rest of their life. One final conversation began where every other one had ended, in complete silence. There were no crowds, no whispered opinions, no hidden agendas left to uncover. Just your person, the mysterious message, and the quiet realization that the last unanswered question had never been about someone else's secret. It had always been about what came next. The 6 words lingered in their mind: "There's one thing nobody has told you." They weren't written to create suspense. They were written because one truth had been overlooked by everyone involved. And once that truth was spoken aloud, the entire journey finally made sense. The final message wasn't a confession from the ex. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explanation. It was an observation from someone who had watched the story unfold from beginning to end. They wrote, "Everyone kept asking what was hidden, but almost no one asked what had quietly changed." Those words settled deeply. Over time, the ex had changed. Your person had changed. Even the people surrounding them had changed. The secret exposed that night wasn't simply a hidden fact, it marked the moment everyone stopped holding on to an outdated version of reality. The writer explained that the X had finally accepted something they had resisted for far too long. The past deserved respect, but it didn't deserve to control the future. That realization wasn't a defeat. It was freedom. Your person smiled softly, not because someone had been proven right or wrong, but because clarity had replaced uncertainty. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't discovering who was hiding a secret. It's discovering that the secret no longer has the power to shape tomorrow. As the evening faded into a peaceful night, your person looked ahead instead of behind for the very first time. The mystery that began with whispers had ended with understanding. The hidden truth wasn't about deception, it was about growth, acceptance, and the quiet courage to let old chapters remain exactly where they belong. Every unanswered question had led to one simple realization: the strongest relationships are built not on perfect histories, but on honest beginnings. And perhaps that's why this story unfolded the way it did. Not to expose someone. Not to embarrass anyone. But to remind us that the truth has an extraordinary way of arriving exactly when people are finally ready to receive it. As this chapter closes, one thing becomes beautifully clear: the biggest secret was never hidden inside the past, it was waiting inside the future that had been quietly opening all along. A quiet morning arrived with no unexpected messages, no unfinished conversations, and no mysteries waiting around the next corner. Instead, something even more surprising appeared: a sense of peace that had been missing for far too long. Your person stepped outside, took a deep breath, and realized that for the first time in months, they weren't searching for hidden meanings in every memory. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt freeing. And sometimes, that's the greatest sign that a story has truly reached the chapter it was always meant to find. Over the following days, little moments began confirming what the truth had already revealed. Friends who once avoided difficult conversations started speaking openly. Old misunderstandings faded without anyone forcing them away. Even the memories connected to the X no longer carried confusion, they became reminders of lessons that had quietly shaped everyone involved. Your person understood something remarkable: not every ending is meant to create sadness. Some endings exist to make room for a beginning that couldn't happen until the past had finally settled. Looking back, the exposed secret wasn't valuable because it shocked anyone. It mattered because it removed the last barrier between uncertainty and clarity. Every unanswered question had gently guided your person toward greater confidence, and every unexpected revelation had prepared them for a future no longer defined by old assumptions. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon one final time, your person smiled at a future that no longer needed constant explanations. They realized that the most meaningful relationships are never built on perfectly written stories. They're built on honesty, patience, and the courage to keep moving forward even when every answer hasn't arrived yet. The truth about the X had finally found its place, not as the center of the story, but as one chapter among many. And that made all the difference. If this journey stayed with you, thank you for spending these moments here. Sharing your thoughts below or passing this story along to someone who enjoys heartfelt mysteries helps keep stories like this alive. Until the next story begins, remember this: sometimes the biggest secrets don't change who we are, they simply reveal who we've quietly become all along.